So we left off the other day on this notion that the reason so many of us are unhappy is because 99% of what we think is about ourselves, and the self doesn't even exist. Well, turns out that's a very old idea. It goes back to the Buddha about 2,500 years ago in his No Self lecture. And to most people, this sounds absurd because they'll just say, well, of course I exist, and there's no denying that there's a certain level of practical self that does exist on a level. I mean, I get in my car, I come home to my house, I'm in my office. And so we're not saying that that doesn't exist. What we're doing is taking it a little bit deeper and getting into exactly how this self exists. And let's go about 2,500 years from the Buddha's lecture in terms of Western neuroscience. And it wasn't until about the 60s that Michael Gazzaniga and a number of other neuroscientists discovered that through this operation, it's called the split brain operation, where they literally split the communication between the left and right sides of the brain, and they were able to isolate the left side of the brain. And in a number of studies, what they were able to find is that the left side of the brain seems to be the place that generates these thought errors, these stories, these elaborate tales, and um, uh, stories that are oftentimes just completely made up and have very little to do with reality. And as it turns out, one of these stories, in fact, Gazzaniga even titled one of his chapters, The Fictional Self, one of these stories is the story of who we think we are. And so the reason neuroscience is so important is because it helps tune us into the exact neural mechanisms of what's giving rise to the self so we can start to understand where the story comes from and we can start to disidentifying with it. And so I'll leave you with a quote that I'll pick up on tomorrow, but this is from Houston Smith that said, "The brain breathes mind like the lungs breathe air." And so it's a natural consequence of having a brain to create this mind that's capable of creating all these fictions. And one of these problematic fictions, one of these problematic stories is this story of who we think we are. So I'll pick that up tomorrow.